Good afternoon. Thank you, Holman, for that great welcome, and thanks all of you for being here today. I have to say I haven't had a chance to spend much time in Georgetown, but it's great to be here. I was around town. I would have loved the nightlife when I was 18 years old, but that's a different story. I found a headline, associated with this that I found quite humbling. It said everyone at Georgetown was excited to welcome a new leader of the campus, an internationally respected figure, a guy who back in the day also was a great college athlete. And I was very flattered, and then I found out it was really about Patrick Ewing, so I did. But many of you are here today to really think about globalization, study the world. I just had a chance to meet with some of the students, and really what I want to do today is to tell you living in unprecedented times and maybe give you ways to think through that. I want to give you, as the dean said, some views on globalization, what works, what doesn't work, what needs to change. But as I do it, I want you to keep foremost in your mind that the U.S. has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's GDP. And so I hope to persuade you today that rather than pulling back on globalization, the U.S. can and should win the global game, but we have to compete. Now, I've spent my career doing just that. When I joined GE in 1982, 80% of our revenue was in the United States. In 2017, almost 70% of our revenue will be global. We have customers in 180 countries around the world. Our exports exceed $20 billion. Our U.S. workers earn high wages because they make leadership products that we sell around the world. Globalization has made us more efficient and more competitive. We built our global position as a proud American company. Our headquarters are in the United States. Much of our technology originates here. It's our largest market, and we share American values. We're all trained to believe that competing to win around the world was an imperative for an American company, and that for that we would be admired. Today, as the dean said, people question globalization. The U.S. is challenging trade deals and has effectively shut down our export bank. And the U.S. isn't alone. Protectionist barriers are rising in Europe and Asia as well. Economic nationalism is replacing free trade as the dominant idea of the era. And at the same time, the Chinese are frequently replacing the United States as a leader on the global stage, growing their influence through expanding relationships and economic development. So let's look back just for a second and say, what's happening? How did we end up in the situation we're in today? But our current policy favors foreign companies operating in the U.S. over American companies operating abroad. And our current policy favors American companies who import goods manufactured outside the U.S. over companies that manufacture in the U.S. and export. So in a country that wants to grow manufacturing jobs and exports, our tax system does just the opposite. All of our global competitors have some form of border adjustment. The entire German system is in place to help exporters. Isn't worth at least a debate. And the U.S. should revitalize and strengthen our export finance institutions, equipping them to support American exporters, and as importantly, to deter foreign government actions that violate the rules. Foreign governments view our bright line delineation between foreign policy and international economic policy as naive. And frankly, our inability to get the EXIM Bank up and running is just pathetic. This move has our global competitors licking their chops by our unwillingness to compete. Every global competitor has an export bank. It's favored by 2/3 of Congress. Let me tell you, when you're selling a wind turbine in Kenya or a locomotive in Egypt, you don't feel like a crony capitalist, to be honest with you. The EXIM Bank doesn't pick winners and losers, but without it, the U.S. is going to lose. So my admonition here is let's just get on with it. We need to simplify and make our global development institutions more competitive and measure outcomes, not effort. Over the last decade, China has invested $100 billion in Africa to grow. In 2013, the U.S. announced the Power Africa Initiative, the great fanfare, committing $7 billion. Since then, we've dispersed $100 million of that amount. Let's see. $100 billion for China, $100 million for the United States. That's not winning. Lastly, and importantly, the U.S. must continue to shape the terms of trade. President Trump has indicated his desire to engage bilaterally rather than through big multilateral deals. I think that's consistent with the new era. The world is moving from one dominated by big, complicated multilateral agreements and institutions to one focused on direct engagement country by country. And we need to continue to lead with trade agreements to help small and medium-sized enterprises and a foreign policy tool for the president and the country. I reiterate, GE's had 7 years to globalize. If we haven't done it on our own, shame on us. But every small business in the United States doesn't have the infrastructure we have. And the trade deals are the only way that they can get access to global markets. So rather than withdrawing from trade deals, we should seek work to modernize and improve them. NAFTA represents an opportunity for the U.S. government to do just that. We have an opportunity to create an integrated North American energy bloc, which could drive down costs and incentivize U.S. manufacturing. And with the right reforms, Mexico should be a huge market for American products. So, from the government side, just level the playing field. We can handle the rest. But we're not going to grow as a country if we don't trade with people. We need to be confident and strategic. There are two levers you have when you're president of the United States to shape international affairs. One is military, one is economic. It would be foolish to give up on an important part of our arsenal, the economic side. And I think President Trump is already showing signs that he will integrate our economic and geopolitical strength to get a fair deal. Now, for all the students here today, because Georgetown sits at the top, export-led growth is out there to be had, but it takes hard work and the will to compete right now. Now, when companies believe that globalization is primarily about outsourcing, and when our country is less competitive, and when our government doesn't engage, and when companies reduce investing, workers suffer. And that's kind of the backdrop in the United States. Because of these factors, we're not going back to a purely free trade world. We're just not going to. But is protectionism the answer? I guarantee you that we in the U.S. have the most to lose through protectionism. If leaders think people in this room or around the country want to live without the many benefits that economic integration has enabled, they're in for a rude awakening. We need to fight for new technologies, not for old ones. So I don't really consider myself to be a global philosopher. Rather, I view my role as preparing GE to compete for world markets and to do so with confidence. Our role as a company is to grow profitably for investors, support our employees and customers, and represent our country well. And we believe that the will to compete is the purest American value. So my thesis today is that instead of moving backwards, let's compete for the world. Let's try harder. This is true for both the private sector and the public sector. For companies, we should aspire to have the same market share outside the United States that we do inside the United States. Globalization should be more about growth than it is about lower wages. And by so doing, we're going to grow exports. We're going to grow. For government, it has to be about leveling the playing field. We need to make our country more competitive by embracing things like tax reform and infrastructure. And at the same time, we need to engage globally to make sure all markets are open for U.S. products. Now, I speak here today with some credibility. GE has $80 billion of revenue outside the United States and grew that by 19% in the first quarter of 2017. Our strategy is based on connected localization. Our advancement requires building capability on the ground in fast-growing markets. We earn the right to compete by investing, operating, and building relationships in the countries where we do business. We will always be a strong American manufacturer, but we've also built factories around the world using a manufacturing strategy to open up new markets. And by being global and local, that gives us the ability to compete and win in 180 countries around the world. We're a real and regular presence in diverse markets, while also maintaining strong manufacturing and technology in the U.S. Over the last 15 years, 80% of our jet engines and 80% of our turbines have been sold outside the United States. So when we win globally, we also benefit the United States. So what would be my formula or advice for American companies? First, we need to get more local. We have to realize that sustainable growth requires local capability inside a global context, what we call connected localization. Put every country in play. At GE, we have 25 countries with more than $1 billion in revenue. In the next decade, let's say, we're going to sell more gas turbines in Indonesia and Vietnam than we will in the United States. Think about that. Our leadership team is filled with local talent, many of whom have built a career in GE. They're connected to the market. I don't have to read the paper to figure out what's going on in the country. Our information is fresh and our relationships are strong. This helps us win, even in China. We have 20,000 employees in China today, supported by multiple factories and research centers. We lead in power, healthcare, aviation, and oil and gas. We're a net exporter from the United States. We partner with Chinese construction companies and leverage their funding to win deals in Africa and Asia. These activities have created jobs in both China and the United States. Or take India, a country where GE has been active for a century. We worked on a project for 20 years, that involved global teams and sharing knowledge across the company. Well, what brought this project home was our connections with people on the ground. And in 2015, we won a $3 billion order to upgrade India's rail system. That's because we're a global company that's intensely local. American companies need to reinvest in manufacturing. This is a source of competitiveness and middle-class jobs. But by leading in additive manufacturing and new innovation, we can make things anywhere in the world at low cost. In the past, productivity could only be achieved through huge factories and low-cost labor. In the future, manufacturing will be driven by new materials, additive techniques, digitized plants. Factories will be smaller, more flexible, more globally mobile. Our goal is to make what we want, where we want, with workers who are more productive and earn high wages. Another driver of speed and productivity for the last decade or so, we may be the only leadership team in history of, really of this country that's sold $100 billion worth of businesses and bought $100 billion worth of businesses. And it was in the context of kind of what you just said. We want to make the company narrower, and we want to make the company deeper. So fundamentally, we're basically in 6 or 7 core industrial markets that have common technology, common global footprint. We utilize what we call the GE store that allows us to share ideas across the company, things like that. But we exited, we were in the media business. We've exited all of the financing business other than the ones that finance our own assets. We have a common, strain of IT that helps drive the company. So we're narrower and deeper if you look at it. And then beyond that, multi-business companies are always going to go in and out of favor. The way I think about it is, does our jet engine business do better than its competitors? Does our healthcare business do better than its competitors? In other words, is our unique shape, is it a source of competitive advantage or is it a source of bureaucracy? If it's a source of bureaucracy, we should get smaller. If it's a source of competitive advantage, we should keep going. And I think we have to be very clear-eyed about that. The last part of your question, which I think is also a good one related to the conversation we have today, which is there's a certain set of responsibilities that accrue to big companies. Now, GE's not alone. That accrue to Amazon or Facebook or other players, where you're going to get more scrutiny, and you have to be willing to kind of live up to the higher standards of scrutiny that you deserve. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.